Right, it's 5 o'clock, we'll start the meeting. First item is evacuation procedure. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs and do not use the lift. Once outside the building, please gather outside the Yorkshire Bank on opposite side of the road. Exit by the door in which you entered the room, or by the fire exits which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exit signs. If you need any assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of the staff. Please also make sure your mobile phones are turned off or set to silent. And this meeting will be broadcasted for future reference if anybody bothers watching, I suppose. Item number 2, apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Grant, substitute Councillor Evans. Apologies for Councillor Candy, substitute Councillor Ridkin. I've also got apologies here for Councillor Doherty, as yet no substitute. Okay.
Chair, could I just say Councillor Llewellyn Nash is coming, but she will be slightly late to the meeting.
Okay. All those apologies accepted? Okay. Right, can I sign the minutes of the 19th of December meeting? Yeah.
Chair, I've got two things to say with regards to the minutes, if possible. There's one thing that's missing from page 7 under the car parking charging working group. And members may recall that Councillor Brown, who was a substitute on that meeting, actually moved a recommendation that we call for a review into the existing car parking charges to bring them in line with neighbouring local authorities, and that isn't actually minuted within these minutes. So could I request that is minuted, and the video does also state that as well.
Is that everybody else's recollection as well?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay then, can we agree to include that then, yeah?
Agreed.
Did you have another point, or was that just...
No, that was it.
Well,
Thank
that's
you.
it. With that amendment, can I sign these? Okay. Get there eventually. Declarations of interest, other than the ones that are already printed. Nothing? Okay. Wendy, do we have any public consultation? Any speakers? No. Right, item number 6, the Waste Management Performance Report. Glenn, if you can take us through this, please.
Thank you, Chair. Before we sort of get started on the report, what I'd like to say and to the members is that in our haste to get the performance report drafted and submitted, following a review late this morning, we have identified some areas where the data is unfortunately not the most accurate that we could have used for the report. What hopefully with your agreements is what we would like to do. We've identified some of the areas that we know are to be not deliberately misleading, but we haven't used the best data sets. What we would like to do is revise the report and then send that through to all the members here today. To keep that accuracy rather than potentially mislead OSP on the performance. the actual performance report, the thinking behind it was to give an overview of where we are with things in the services that we provide, and to highlight any trends that we find or any areas that we need to focus on moving forward. It's an infancy report that we'd like your thinking on, your recommendations on how we would like moving it forward. We intend to bring a twice yearly report to Scrutiny with that continued update, and as I say, we'd like your input into how that fits with what we've put in front of the meeting today, and any recommendations where you think it would benefit members to have either different information or different format, or any sort of basically what would you prefer. I'm assuming that members have read the report, and that if there's any areas that you'd like clarifying or you've got questions on, I'm happy to take those questions now rather than go through the report in entirety.
Anybody final? Councillor Condon?
Yes, I've actually brought my laptop because the numbers in the report are too small to see, and some of the coloured stuff, on a laptop with a PDF, you can actually read it and see what's in the report. One general point is this is data up to the end of the last financial year, so it's already 10 months out of date, because it goes to the end of March 2019, and it's January 2020 now. And I'm a member, or not a member, but I attend the Warwickshire Waste Partnership meetings that get quite clear data sets, and it might be worth, rather than reinventing the wheelchair, if we could maybe ask to have the same data as is presented to the County Council, which is quite clear. It's quarterly data, and also it provides the 5 districts data, so it's quite good for comparison. So I think we have quite a good waste partnership in Warwickshire, and as they have a quarterly report on waste data, we should actually just use the same report and data if that's available. On terms of presentation, there's quite a few of the graphs, like at 5.4, where you start the graph at 10,000, which effectively misses out. They're not zero-based, some of the graphs. Some of them are and some of them aren't. But it really, if you don't zero-base all the graphs, you can get very misleading impressions, particularly on 5.4, where you effectively list out 10,000 tonnes on every single value. So it does make the height of the bars look very bad. In terms of general trend, we're really flatlining on everything, and I do think we need a restart and a reinvigoration, and hopefully with a focus on climate change, we can actually start to encourage a transformation again. And if you look at the very end of your report, you show where we are in the league tables of recyclers, which I think about 112, something like that. And we really should aim to be top quarter performance. It is a real opportunity to have some climate change benefits, to get people recycling more. There's an opportunity to save the council a lot of money, both the Borough Council and the County Council. And I think we should be more aspirational. And particularly about reducing the tonnage, because the residual tonnage is the thing that really costs money and causes the environmental damage. So a lot of the stuff we do to reduce waste, it's not just how much you recycle, but it's actually not creating waste in the first place. It's the message we keep needing to push home. And there's a lot of good stuff happening. There's a lot of good stuff we could do in future, and we need to be moving forward. Leamington has a repair cafe, which is really good. I don't know if people know about these, but basically once a month in a community centre, people who know how to repair things meet with people who've got broken things. Some of it is electronic, but some of it is needlework, and it's a wide range of stuff that's broken. It's been very successful, so I hope some of those things like repair cafes are brought into Nuneaton and Bedworth, so that actually, maybe once a month in Bedworth and once a month in Nuneaton, we can actually start getting some of these things out the waste stream and repaired. Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I wanted to say that we are constantly looking at ways to reinvigorate the recycling service that we operate. We recently did a Metal Matters campaign. You may have seen some of the information on it. and that sort of with a view to increasing the amount of metal in the recycling rather than going into the waste stream. Have we got any figures for the
repair phase?
no, for the metal matters tonnages?
Not.
No. But we should get some data fairly soon as to how that has it had an impression on the overall recycling and change people's mentality, to be fair, on the way they recycle.
Councillor Sargent?
All right, I've got 2 or 3 questions, so I'll ask them all. They're fairly simple ones. On the bulky waste collections, are we scrapping the metal? What was the next one? Are the small van fly tipping, is that particular area? So is there an area that's like a hot spot? And on the page 30, you're saying you've got a number of colleagues who are being trained in water course and bankside clearance. How far in advance are they to do that?
Okay, so we do scrap the metal and get a receipt for that. That goes to EMR. And that's primarily through the fly tipping collections that we do. Bankside training, unfortunately, because the consultant that we use, or that is used by the police, by the Environment Agency, his diary is fully booked. Or we've got the risk assessments that we've taken, we've looked at the equipment that's needed. All we need to do when the river sort of starts to fine down more than it is now because of health and safety, we will then start the actual on the bank training with our trainer, and then we will be able to then start to use our colleagues for riverside clearance and any other removal that requires ropes and that type of action. Sorry, Kenneth, something else?
It was the particular areas, because you've got the small van fly tipping seems to have shot up, and I'm just wondering if it was like hotspots, because somewhere in there you've said about buying CCTV cameras.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of work on hotspots. What we've agreed with the CCTV is we will go out with a full RIPA, which is the authorisation via magistrates to get the CCTV cameras up for our own protection. Unfortunately, what that needs in the application is a hotspot, or the areas that you target, to have had reasonable precautions and reasonable measures taken before we deploy. So we have done some work on hotspots, haven't we?
Yeah, we can get that information
but we can
for
get
you
that,
as well.
Yeah.
And we can include that when we do the review of the report. But then we will put signage up, and we will deploy in those hotspot areas that we've found.
Okay. And the last thing, can you just pass on my thanks to the litter pickers, especially the Ackleborough ones, because they do a fantastic job. They're up against continual.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Councillor Evans?
Thank you very much, Chair. First question, on page 29 of the report, there's a breakdown of the value of fines that we've collected. Would you be able to give me, not now obviously, but in the future, a breakdown of where they've come from? Is it from litter in the town centre, or from fly tipping, stuff like that? Yeah. One of the things that I think is quite staggering is we've spent another £22,000 in the last financial year in collecting fly tipping, and one of my big groans is fly tipping on Rabbit Lane in Bedworth, Woodlands Lane. And when I first became a councillor, I contacted your department and I asked if this could be classified as a hotspot, and if we could envisage potentially doing what North Warwickshire Borough Council do, and that is to introduce CCTV to that area to catch those people. And the response that I got was that that wouldn't be financially viable. And then I read today that we're now investing in 4 CCTV cameras. So, can I ask why I'm being told 2 different stories?
I really don't know why you were told it's not financially viable. Obviously, there has to be the evidential value that would we catch them with CCTV. The reason why we've gone for cameras, and unfortunately we didn't go for covert cameras because of the problems that's faced with covert cameras, and the full Ripper, ironically, we've gone for these static cameras that require a post, it's self charging, etc. But that is the reason why we've gone for these cameras, to be overt and show people we intend to catch you and prosecute you if we can. So please accept my apologies why you were told it's not financially viable. Because of the procurement of the equipment, yes, there's a capital cost, but it's not extortionate, and that is why we've gone down that
Absolutely.
that road. Yeah.
So could I ask if Woodlands Lane could be looked at as a potential hotspot for all
Yes.
these new cameras? And I don't know if it's just 4 to start off with, but do you envisage taking on more cameras? Because clearly there are more than 4 hotspots in the borough. I could probably name you 20 right here, right now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, in terms of CCTV, any overt CCTV that we have within the borough that's already there, we can use as our eyes and ears, if you like, for catching any waste crime. We will certainly look at the effect it has, and with a view to upgrading to more cameras if we get that return on our investment. And clearly there's people out there who don't care, and I think we will get some positive results.
Yeah, good. And my final question is, I'm really disappointed that Paul Spain is leaving us. He's a fantastic, has left.
Yeah,
He was a fantastic officer.
he was.
And it's a great loss to us. I just wondered if you'll be taking on a full-time replacement for Paul in terms of the responsibilities that he had for sort of the community aspect, the community litter picks, because I think it is important for us to have an officer in the refuse department to take a lead on those things.
We have replaced Paul. Unfortunately, he hasn't got the skill set that Paul had, but we will still be looking at taking on that role within the team, whether it be Paul's replacement or another officer. But we recognise there's been an important role within the team, and we'll obviously continue to work with you, the communities and yourselves to make that happen.
Thank you.
Councillor Wansley.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions that are both very separate, so with permission, Chair, I'll do one first and
Okay.
the second one. My first question really comes back to the point that we've been discussing about the fly tipping, and actually the designation and use of cameras where they're overt rather than covert, and therefore seeking application through magistrates for RIPA, and what impact, what assessment, has been done on the additional cost and time in order to do that through magistrate court, both physical court fee time and also through legal time, whereas we actually have other statute, given that most of this happens on council land, be it ours or be it county through the highways. And if we're doing over, why we would go for additional costs and additional measures that perhaps are unnecessary and may actually disadvantage the system where it could have been used in maybe more locations.
Okay. The reason why we decided to go for RIPA, because even with a overt deployment of cameras, you still have to go through the RIPA authorisation in effect within the local authority and the change of command. Because of the issues out there for collateral intrusion and falling foul of the RIPA regulations, we felt and legal felt that it would be far more belt and braces to go full RIPA through magistrates to protect the reputation of the council should anything be lodged against us, against the deployment of the cameras and any issues that ensues. It's the first full RIPA that we've gone through, but it was felt that's the way that we potentially needed to go, following the training that we had.
And anything on the additional cost that would bring as a result?
I haven't checked the additional cost, but I'm led to believe it's not as onerous as first thought. Magistrates have got far more used to dealing with these RIP applications and are more geared up to do that.
And my second point is sort of leads back to the enforcement. I understand is it yourselves that will be the responsible for the contracting of things like the contract officers in the town centre when we drop litter? Is that yourselves? Is that through the street cleaning?
The actual enforcement?
Yeah.
It's through an enforcement department called 3GS.
But it's your department, the contract, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the things that I've seen continually, and I think that really begrudges a lot of residents, is there is a genuine need, of course, for the job to be done. but there is also a question of the balance of approach. I think you're probably going to know the question I ask, 'cause it's probably the one that raises you most, is actually to what extent are 3GS as our contractor, we contract them, to what extent do they get any commission for the works in which they do? Because there are a number of instances that frankly are absolutely abhorrent upon this council, where you've got a small child that's dropped something and a word with a parent would quite simply have been enough. And I think that's a gripe. There is a very difference between actually something that's completely, effectively it would be intent, in a criminal setting it would be intent, where there is quite evidently not an intent by a very minor child in a pushchair. It's been missed by a parent. And that, I think, is a big gripe for the public at large.
It is, but it was also a misquoted, misrepresented incident that didn't actually happen.
There are other incidents that I've witnessed.
The incidents that we've been made aware of are conduct of the officers. Because of the use of body-worn cameras, we've been able to refute those claims because the officers, although they don't film an incident occurring, they film the actual contact afterwards, and there was no evidence to suggest that there were any issues with the conduct of any of the 3GS officers. The legislation is quite simple. If an offence is witnessed, if an item is dropped and left, then it is a fixed penalty offence. Unfortunately, the officers get into a situation where residents, offenders, alleged offenders don't want to be held account, and we get some false reporting, false complaints, misrepresentation for that reason, because they don't want to pay a fixed penalty. I can assure you that if there was an intent or a complaint where it's upheld that the conduct was not correct and in keeping with what Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council require, then we would take steps to make sure that didn't happen. And 3GS are more than happy to work with us on that. In terms of commission, it's illegal to have commissions and targets, and we built that specially into the contract that no targets would be a part of the contract moving forward. And that is obviously, they have a brief to issue a fixed penalty when an offence being witnessed, but under no circumstances must they overstep that mark or generate that for their own gain.
Is there any other member who hasn't spoke before I bring Councillor Godfrey?
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the Collection Authority league table, when you look down the league table, we will never be in the top 10 because they are all leafy suburbs. We've got to aim to get into the top 50, whereas you break it down, we've got to aim to get in the top 50. We will never be in the top 10 because they're more rural councils. Thank you.
We're striving
Yeah.
to meet those sort of aspirations. It's going to be difficult, but we will try. Thank you.
Any other councillor before I bring Councillor Condicor in who hasn't spoken? No? Councillor Condicor?
Just a couple of things that have come up in debate that I want to follow up on. In terms of the fly tipping, we don't measure in this report how many of the fines are for fly tipping. You just grouped it all together. And obviously the effort to actually get G4N, whatever they're called, to get fined, it's far easier for them to follow people dropping cigarette butts than it is to go out to a lay-by in Wellington or Borkington or wherever and actually tackle fly tipping. That's a hard one to find. So it would be useful to have a breakdown on actually fly tipping fining. Secondly, for a lay-by in Wellington, I'm sure it's the same for some ones in Bedworth, there is absolutely nothing around. So in terms of the Reaper and all this stuff, it's a totally different situation to actually one in an urban area where you will be at risk of catching other people on film. And tied in with that, can we put the signs up now? Because if you only put the signs up when you install the cameras, you haven't got the benefit of having a sign saying cameras operate in this area. And also, the sign itself will actually make people drive to a lay-by in North Warwickshire rather than dumping Wellington. The final point I wanted to make was on the litter picking. We've got a lot more new housing in Wellington, and I forwarded you some correspondence about it. And myself, I've seen an awful lot of litter up the top end of the Wellington Road, where there didn't used to be housing. So can I have your assurance that that area is now going to be regularly litter picked? Because obviously things change. Yeah? We build 1,000 extra houses, and the litter then moves further out and becomes more intense all the way down the Wellington Road. So we do need that step change.
What I perhaps should have mentioned at the introduction, what we've actually implemented now is a street cleansing monitoring system that incorporates the old statutory indicator 195, where we go out and monitor areas and score them from an A to a D based on the litter, dog fooding, weeds, and just the general locality. What we intend to use that for is to redeploy resource where they're required, and not necessarily just work on this is the way we've always done it, and this is the way we've always allocated work. We're hoping to include that in the next report as well, in terms of the areas and wards that we've monitored and what the scores are and what actions we've taken to remedy the problems that we face. And I do feel that it will help in areas where we perhaps haven't focused on before, such as Weddington. If there is a need, we can then identify that through the report and then allocate the resource and get the training and sort of implement that with the ops on street cleansing to be more vigilant and report more issues, and then sort of distribute resource where they're needed.
With respect to it, it does look like there's been no litter picking for a long while up the top end of the Wellington Road. So if it's an area that's not on your rota, then it just gets ignored, and it's a growing problem. It is absolutely disgusting up there. I was actually running down the Wellington Road because I'm trying to lose a bit of weight, and just as you turn off the Wellington Trail, new roundabout, and the estates themselves are still managed by Davidsons and Taylor Wimpey, so that's not our problem. But the main road, the bus stops, the bit that people see in their daily lives is just strewn with litter that is not being picked.
Point taken, Councillor.
No.
Is that it, Councillor? Okay. Mrs. Ross?
Can I just ask when is the bin collection starting again? Because I get quite cross about the gap in between collections, and I've got a full bin and a half just sitting there, and I have no idea when the next collection is. Having paid my £80 for my collections, you know, I think a lot of people are asking, you know, when's it going to start again? Because with climate change, grass has been growing all year with all the rain we've had, so you know we can't be taking the tops off. So the things, and since before Christmas.
Yeah, they start on the 3rd of February. The Golden Waste collections.
Yes.
Yeah, they'll start again with the new stickers on the 3rd of February.
3rd of February.
Yeah, and we've used this law to not only just because we needed the administrative work done behind the charging, but also training of staff and vital training of staff on health and safety matters.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, with Christmas and what have you, and everything that goes into the green bin, it soon builds up, so it's annoying.
Right.
Okay.
Anybody else? Like to thank you for the report. Anybody get their facts and figures sorted out correctly for us and take on the concerns that have already been raised at the panel, Glenn, and thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Chair, just on the point I made about the data, can we have the same data as goes to the waste partnership?
Partnership. Yep.
Right, item number 7, empty homes review. John?
Chair. I'll just clean line get this report really is kind of a starting point to give information on where we are with empty homes and processes that we follow. So the background really is to kind of reiterate that NABCEL is our local authority trading arm, and it's there really for commercial purposes. So it's there for, as it stands now, largely homes for rent at market levels. So that's what we do. For empty homes in the private sector in the borough, it's a different process, and it is around trying to both support and enforce, but to a lesser degree, because the legislation's diminished somewhat, to bring empty homes in the borough back to use. In terms of NABCEL, we've got 42 individual dwellings, so NABCEL homes also manage some hostels and bed and breakfast, but particularly for the individual dwellings. The only real difficulty that was experienced was letting Trinity Court in Attleborough. There were a number of reasons. I think it was the time of year we bought them. The fact that there was some significant snagging work that was required from there, which also included services. Services hadn't been put in individually, those kinds of things. However, they are now all fully let. Since the managing director came on board in June of last year, one of the first things she did was to consider the Trinity Court issue and what may have contributed towards that. And what she's done is worked with Les Snowden as the head of estates to come up really with a new criteria, which mainly says that we've been running for quite some time now. What we know is on a commercial basis, the accommodation that is most in demand is 2 and 3 bed houses rather than flats. So we wouldn't be prioritising taking on any flats. So again, just for clarification, the properties are bought by the council and then leased over to NABCEL. So the council still owns them. In terms of the private sector, we currently have a target to return 12 long-term empty properties back into occupation. Last year that was 24, so we did exceed that. And for this financial year, we'll exceed it again, so we clearly need to look at that target that's been set. So as at the end of December, there were 20 that had been returned into occupation. In terms of capacity, we have one part-time empty property officer. But what we have done is been able to utilise our financial assistance policy and our empty loans approach. So what we will do, we will lend empty home owners, coin a new phrase, up to £10,000 of property to help them to do the works that are necessary to either bring it to market or to rent it out. What we have been doing over the last 12 months actually is looking at the more longer term and the more problematic properties, those that have maybe been attracting antisocial behaviour and other activity that we don't want to have in the borough. Nationally, at 4.5, clearly nationally there's an issue with the number of empty homes. Some have seen rises of kind of like 30%. We're nowhere near that. That doesn't mean we don't have issues. We are doing everything that we can within the capacity that we have at the moment. So there's a newly formed derelict building initiative with Warwickshire Police Fire and Rescue, and together with colleagues from Planning and Health and Housing, that's been pulled together. It's been piloted in Rugby. So those properties are identified and then the focus is put on those. The progress of that and the effectiveness of that is being monitored, and if it's successful, we'll look to roll out that approach. As I said before, there are some enforcement tools that we can do. but they are very few and far between. CPOs, so compulsory purchase orders, are timely and expensive, and we as the council have to foot the bill for that. Excuse me. But really, we've also held, so I don't know whether members are aware of Cornerstone partnership that we've entered into, which it's a charity who are buying up empty homes, initially leasing them to us for temporary accommodation, so self-contained temporary accommodation for homeless, but that will convert within the partnership after 2 years. Those will then convert to private rent, but at affordable levels that the council will nominate into. So we are continuing on with that, continuing on with the success of that. So really, in conclusion, it does come back to the capacity that we have. We are extremely proactive. We are looking for other ways to bring support in that isn't from our own resources. And we'll continue on in that way, given where we are now.
Thanks, Dan. Any members? Councillor Evans?
Yeah, Trinity Court, is that the green one in Attleborough?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marmite, I think.
Sorry, did you say that's now to capacity?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, right. Because one of the questions that I did have was, if it wasn't, have you approached some of the major employers in the town?
Yes.
But if that's the case, that's fine.
We have been doing that, and there's some of the George Eliot employees are actually in there.
Right, okay.
Any other members? Councillor Condicor?
Yeah, it was me who actually asked for this on the agenda because I see the homeless problems we have. You know, we sometimes go to the dropping centre and there's probably about 30 or 40 that have an evening meal at the various places for the drop-in. And a lot of them are sofa surfing or whatever, and there's a general lack of cheap rented accommodation. And obviously the empty houses are very quick to bring into use compared to like the projects at the council house, which is probably an 18-month £1 million. So getting these empties is a really quick win, and it's really good that we've got 20 this year and 24 the year before empties brought back into use. And what makes it extra good is we actually get that new homes bonus, not just for building new homes, but actually for the change in our long-term empties. With the new homes being built, the actual new long-term empties has actually been going up. So the more we can do to recycle these homes, and particularly where people are struggling to redo them. So it's a great thing the council's doing, but having a target for 12 and having someone working half-time on it is a lost opportunity. I think our best year ever, we had an officer working almost full-time on it, and he got 40 back into use. Yeah, a really good empty homes officer can actually help the housing crisis and get the government to pay the council more money. So I really hope we can actually go to a full-time empty homes officer. It would tick so many boxes, and it would probably save the council money with the improvement of the new homes bonus. Also, I mentioned yet again the council's own housing stock. We had 113 empty on the latest government stats, of which 69 council homes or flats or whatever were empty for over 6 months. So there is still a lot of work to do on the council's housing stock. I know a lot of it is hard to rent, but it is a low-hanging fruit that we have some control over. And I think we have been successful in getting the warden's flats converted. So yeah, it's an area where it really does need doing. We have a low-income town here. A lot of the projects to build new housing is limited by how many people buy a new house. And for that, you need 3 people to buy a market house for 1 affordable to be built. Whereas we've got empty houses sitting around virtually every street in the borough. There are about 1,600 officially empty. There are ones that residents have complained about and told the council, there's an empty house there, it's been empty for 5 years, 10 years, and someone's still paying council tax on it, so it's not even on the empty homes list. we have a housing crisis that is getting worse, and yet we're having an ever increasing number of empty homes. So can I ask, can we look at getting a full-time empty homes officer? Thank you, Chair.
John?
I think, Chair, that would have to be, I wouldn't disagree, but it would have to be a recommendation to Cabinet, because it would be a spend pressure.
Any other? Anybody else want to speak on this subject? No?
Yeah. Yes.
Councillor Elliott?
I think Councillor Conditore has implied that this big rise in empty homes is due to new homes being built. Do you agree with that?
I don't have the evidence for that. I think one of our kind of biggest experiences has been where you've got maybe a relative has passed away or gone into residential care, and then the family are left not quite sure what to do with the property. Sometimes that will be because the property isn't in a great condition because their relative may not have been able to afford to keep it to a standard, so it kind of, for some families, is a hill that's too big to climb, and they're not really sure what to do with it. For others, they don't need to sell it, they don't need to do anything with it, and they've got memories there. So I'd be loath to say it's simply because there's more homes, but I don't actually have evidence to back that up one way or the other.
Can I just follow that up? But that doesn't kind of explain rises of 30% or more in some authorities, does it? Because that would have always happened.
No, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the causes for the significant rise in some areas, that I don't have the facts why that's happened in other areas. I mean, I don't know whether the Empty Homes report has given further analysis, but I can certainly look into that.
I would say it would be unlikely to be due to new homes because of the cost differential, and it would be interesting to find out. I think what we find is that certainly in the marketplace generally, there is a market for more affordable homes and more executive homes. So the properties that are empty would usually be more affordable because of the condition they're in, not always but usually. So it stands to reason therefore that there'd be a market for those as well as the newer homes. Absolutely, I'm right there.
Anybody else before I bring Councillor Conditore back in again? Who hasn't spoken? Councillor?
Can I move that this committee asks the council to, or the cabinet to have a look at employing an empty homes officer full-time and the viability of that?
That's a request and for to the panel. Is that fine to second that?
I'll second that, Chair.
Okay. All in favour? Those against? Okay, that's carried. And thanks for the report, Don. Appreciate it.
Chair, before we move on, can I submit my apologies for the rest of the meeting? Just been told of a family emergency, so let's go to the LEM. Thanks very much, everyone.
Kathleen?
I understand the report was requested because questions were raised at full council, and I'm aware that those questions were specifically about allotment provision in Bedworth and Balkington in relation to the plan. The strategy and the plan obviously is for the whole of the borough. As you're aware, we have to have quite a detailed evidence base for local plans, and one of the first pieces of evidence actually that we did for the local plan was the allotment strategy, which I've included as Appendix A. So what that did was a complete audit of the allotment provision that we had in the borough at that time, both in the quantity of allotments and the quality. It also looked at a minimum standard of what a minimum standard of allotment should be, and that came out at 20 plots per 1,000 households. So that's generally a standard that's looked at in the country. That equates to about 31.5 hectares of allotments that Nuneaton and Bedworth would require. At that time, the existing allotments that we had did meet the need, but that obviously with the growth envisaged in the local plan at that time, it would have required a further 2.5 hectares for allotments. The strategy also looked at the location of those allotments and suggested that sites should be within 15 to 20 minute walking time from residential areas. And it was on that basis that some of the areas in the borough were actually deficient. And they were highlighted at Gallicommon Village, Bermuda Village, the east of Whitestone, Kersley Village, the Hawkesbury Junction area and Bulkington. So what the strategy then said was that the borough plan needed to make provision where appropriate for new allotment sites, and that any new sites must be located to residential areas. So it met the criteria that we were saying was needed. What the allotment strategy then went on to mention, and then what was followed through into the local plan, is that on sites of developments of more than 1,000 dwellings, then that allotment provision should be on site. So in those allocations that are greater than 1,000 dwellings, part of the policy said that there should be allotments on site. But all new development should mitigate against the effect of a deficiency in allotments. So generally speaking, for those sites that aren't included in the ones that have new provision on site, they're requested to pay off-site contributions. They either go to the improvement of existing allotments so that more pitches can be provided on those sites, or where there's a site adjacent that's providing new allotments to help pay for those allotments. So how that panned out into the local plans, there's only 2 sites in the borough plan where the numbers are greater than 1,000 dwellings, and both those in Nuneaton. So I'll just make that, so that's to the north of Nuneaton sites and to Arbury. Obviously we don't know what will happen on the Arbury site yet, we haven't had any sort of planning application for it, but the policy is that there'll be some allotment provision on site. With the north of Nuneaton, as most of you are well aware, applications have come through separately for different bits of the site, but 2 of the sites, so the site at Weddington has an allotment provision within it, and the Callender Farm site, which is to the north of Nuneaton, to the north of the Longship, also has allotment provision with it. There are sites in the plan that have less than 1,000 dwellings, where it is also suggested that there should be some allotments on site, and that's in Bulkington to reflect what I just said, that there was deficiency there within the walking distance, and at Hawkesbury Golf Course, where those of you who have been members of the council for some time will realise we had planning applications on those sites some years ago. The promoters of the land at that time did quite a bit of public consultation, and a lot of the public said that they required allotments in that area, and so that allocation has included some allotments, and we've just had the application for that, which does show some allotments. So, as I say, either allotment provision on site, or I just go again to say that the sorts of monies we've had so far in section 106 range from £8,000 on one of the smaller sites to £20,000 on one of the bigger sites towards allotment provision. Obviously, with any review of the local plan, this is one part of the evidence base that would need to be reviewed. Separate to that, I'm aware that it was a member of the public that first raised a query specifically about Bedworth and Bulkington. I am in email conversation with him separately, and I have agreed that I tried to explain all of this in an email, but it's far better to explain this face to face at a meeting, and I'm in the process of arranging that meeting with him.
Any members? Councillor Evans?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fully supportive of allotments, as I'm sure everyone is in here, for the environmental and social benefits that they bring to the community, but there is a massive shortage of allotments in Bedworth. I can't speak for the Nuneaton because I don't represent the Nuneaton, but in Bedworth there's a massive shortage, and the allotment associations, which are in my council ward, are always telling me about the waiting lists that they have, and you know, people are saying, well, we really want one, but we're having to wait. And my issue is, I think our strategy actually brings a negative impact for Bedworth, because my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of the local plan, what we basically said was, well, if you're presenting a strategic allocation for less than 1,000 dwellings, don't worry about the allotment provision. We're just asking for allotment provision if you've got over 1,000 dwellings. All of these strategic allocations within the local plan for Bedworth are under 1,000 dwellings.
Mhm.
But if you put all of the allocations together, you've got 2,500 dwellings. Okay, so there's a deficiency. So we're not doing anything to meet the shortage in Bedworth. Now, I accept about Hawkesbury, that's great, but realistically, I can't see people from the north of Bedworth travelling down to Hawkesbury to use allotments. So that's one of the moments I got about our strategy. The other thing I wanted to ask was, there's the ratio that's mentioned on page 37 about sort of 20 pitches, or you know what I mean, to every 1,000 houses. Is that set out in legislation or like through the MPPF, or is that just something that we've done ourselves following an audit? And if it is because of legislation, I can understand that. But if not, could we have not created a ratio such as 20 to 500 or something like that? My final question is, for any future planning application, I'm not on the planning committee, so I'm not a planning expert, but for any future planning applications that are within the local plan, when they come to the planning committee, are they able to potentially add a condition in place that a developer has allotment provision within their area?
Right.
So there's a few questions there.
Yeah, that's fine. The 1,000 dwellings is to determine whether the allotment provision is required on that site or not. So the ones that are greater than 1,000, there will have to be some new allotments on that site.
Yes.
For those less than 1,000, we are still negotiating where we can prove that there's a need in that particular area. I think you say you're not on the planning committee. You've sat a couple of times, and I know you've had to train. You're well aware that Section 106 monies can only be requested not to put things that are already wrong in the area, but just to look at the mitigation for that new development. So you couldn't ask to put right something. So if there's already a deficiency, you couldn't ask a developer to pay for that. You could ask them to pay for new allotments or to upgrade. And as I say, some of the monies will be spent on upgrading some of the existing allotments so that the provision there is better. A lot of allotments, there may be some problem with drainage, for instance, which means perhaps one or two plots there haven't been able to be fully utilised or let. So with some monies towards upgrading them, then that may be beneficial. As I say, the other thing is where a site is going to provide, if you like, more a plot of land on their development, and then some of the monies will then go to upgrading those as well. I think I'm right in saying the standard was set through the audit that we did, but it was based on good practice. But having said that, since we had that audit done, a lot of the planning guidance has changed, but a lot of the guidance around allotments is quite old. But it will be a piece of evidence that we do upgrade for any review of the plan. There was another one more question. Oh, about, what happens with it? So if the allotments associations wrote in to us at the time when we're dealing with the planning application, and they say that they considered that there was a need in the area because they had 400 people on their waiting list, and therefore there was the new residents would also add to that need, then yeah, that's when we can ask for monies from that development. You know, you can't if it's not shown to be a need in the area.
Yeah.
But we do work very closely with, obviously, the people in the Parks Department who have responsibility for allotments, as well as any allotment association that wants to get involved.
And the final thing I wanted to say, Chair, it's not connected to you, Catherine, but because I'm sure you've got no sway in this whatsoever, but within the strategy itself, at the time, it says that the council will have 2 meetings a year with the allotment associations. Now I'm told that that's not actually taking place. So if it's possible for that to be minuted as a concern, Chair, and then sent to potentially Philip Richardson or whoever, because they should be taking place.
Councillor Condicola.
Yeah, allotments are absolutely brilliant for loads of different reasons. Particularly mental health is quite often overlooked, and time on the allotment is really beneficial, particularly to people in homes with either small gardens or people in flats. So it's really good. The council is very pro allotments. Quite often also people aren't doing the scale of allotmenting, so we need to be looking a lot more at half plots and things, which I think converting plots into half plots when they become vacant actually means 2 people can get starting at allotmenting. So this is all the sort of thing we need to do. 2 requests. One, does the allotment association get the weekly planning list? And if not, could you suggest to them they did, so they can actually, because they need to know to ask for allotments when a planning application comes in. So it'd be good to liaise to get them on the weekly planning list. And welcome packs. It'd be good if welcome packs actually included allotments, so that actually people who moved into an area with a quite a small house, people may be downsizing, actually see the opportunity of having a half plot on Higham Lane or whichever the name of the ones in Bulkington and Bedworth are. So I think, yeah, we do a lot of good, but we could do more, like I say, going half plots and really promoting the allotments. Final thing I should say, biodiversity. Can you just tell us what happened with the biodiversity calculations? How we keep planting wildflower meadows and various things, but actually a bit of allotment on a site should actually count quite well for the biodiversity.
I'm not aware of whether it does or not. I will check for you.
Anybody else? Right, taking those things into consideration, including the meetings, because I've had, I'm sure like everybody else has had Mr. Magg's email to say there's, and if you call him Mr. Maggs all the time, he did, prefers Bob or Robert, but obviously Robert. And we've all seen that, and obviously in Bedworth Heath where I live, I know that the new developments there's some money going to go to the Smurl Lane allotment or around that area. So there is examples of new development actually contributing. So with what everybody said, could we put that forward as a recommendation to go forward, and I'm sure we'll hear from the Allotment Association. But it's important that over the years we'll try to get a new policy into working within the borough, and if the meetings are not taking place, they should have been taking place. They ought to be taking place. Everybody all right with that?
Yes, Chair.
You again, Kathleen?
Yes, completely different topic. Again, this is as a result of questions at full council and concerns raised by a few members of the public and a few councillors. About last August, September I think it was, we changed the way that planning applications are displayed on the council's website. Now, the reason for that is, I'll try not, well, I can't be too technical because I'm not. What used to happen was any document that was submitted with a planning application was physically uploaded to a server, which then fed that part of the website where planning applications were shown. That part of the website was no longer supported by Microsoft, which meant that we weren't getting security patches for it, which meant that we were at risk. So we, the upshot of that is that that particular system was switched off and we weren't allowed to use it anymore. So what we have tried to do is to utilise a system using the computer systems that we already had. So we have a back office system for planning applications where all the application information is stored. The new system allows, through similar sort of thing to a lot of the other forms on there, allows somebody to search for a planning application, and that automatically links to all the information on the back office system with all the plans and the documents. However, it's a completely different way of doing it. So for those people that had used the council's website for some time, or in the past even once, it did look completely different. There were a couple of hiccups in doing it straight away. One particularly was about searching by address rather than the planning application number, and there were a couple of other things which it's more difficult, particularly if you aren't very tech savvy, to understand how to do it. You have to specifically click in a couple of boxes, whereas before it was a lot easier to do. The other thing is that previously all the documentation that was uploaded to the server then stayed on that server with that application. So in 10 years' time, if you wanted to look at what else had been on that property, or what other application you had been in before, that information was all there. However, with the data protection laws and the general data protection regulations, there was a lot of personal information on some of that data. So we took the view, we were switching the server off, so we took the view, we didn't have the resources at that time just to go and redact everything. The other thing is that obviously we get about 600 or 700 planning applications a year. So there was an awful lot of information there. We only get perhaps 20 or 30 people want to look at historic applications, generally for planning reasons. Get a lot of people who want to look at it for buying housing reasons, including a lot of solicitors and personal search companies. So what we did was we decided that we would take off all the historic applications. Well, they were gone when the server was switched off, but allow anybody that actually wanted that information to request it, and our team would then go through it, because it has to go through now to be redacted, the personal information. Personal information like the appellant's name and address is okay. But there were, for instance, if a developer has done some pre-application discussions and they've had comments sent to them and they've preceded those comments in a document but included people's names and addresses, then that all has to be redacted. So there's an awful lot of information that sits around a planning application that needs to be redacted. So what we're doing at the moment is we will do it straight away for somebody that requests it. We'll get that application and we'll redact it and then put it onto the web. Any planning application that's come in since we switched over is automatically on the system. We then give priority, because there was a problem as well with applications that had come in but we haven't yet determined prior to the system changing over, because some of the information was there, but it wasn't actually titled the same as it would have been when we first put it on. So there was about 10 different documents, all of which they had the same name. So we've given priority to those as well. We are in the process of redacting historic applications, and what we've chosen to do is the biggest ones first, particularly those for estates, because they're the ones that generally people get to look at. So that's why it's happened, and that's what the system is now.
Any councillors? Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. So I originally submitted a scrutiny suggestion form, but then there was a member of the public who decided to ask it as a question, so I thought I'd just move it then at the full council to make sure it definitely comes to this committee. Now, I completely accept why you had to go over to the new system. You know, there would be a lot of questions being asked if the council wasn't complying with the new GDPR legislation, and some hefty fines, I suspect, as well. But I think the whole process, the way that this has been carried out, is completely damning. I think what we should have done is we should have set up this new system with the new planning applications going on to that new system, and when that new system was fully set up, that's when we should have closed the old server and switched over to the new one. What we had was, it was almost as if the old planning portal was just shut down and just went into this new system, but it wasn't already done. It wasn't set up properly, and that caused lots of problems. Now, the reason why I submitted the scrutiny suggestion form at the time was because of basically the abject refusal of the portfolio holder for planning for sort of trying to compromise. It basically said, this is the new system, this is what it is, there'll be no improvements. And that's why I had no choice but to submit the form. But having gone onto the portal over recent weeks, I accept that there's been a number of changes and it has got better. I think with regards to the old applications, you know, pre-2010, you know, I think getting those onto the new system, that would be a seismic, colossal job for the planning department to do. And I have to say, I wouldn't expect planning to do that. So I think as long as there's, you know, the request option for, you know, solicitors and people like that to see old planning applications, that should be fine. But I still think it's quite difficult for people to navigate around the system. I mean, you know, I'm a millennial, but I'm not exactly tech savvy, but even I struggle, you know, and I use computers every day. And one of the suggestions that I did make originally was that we asked the council's communications team to create a YouTube video to explain people, particularly elderly residents, how to get around this new system, and that YouTube video could be uploaded onto the portal itself. Unfortunately, the portfolio holder said it was a waste of time, so that's why that hasn't been followed through. No idea why Councillor Phillips believes that. I think it's a relatively fair compromise, to be honest. But, you know, that's his opinion. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. And I would actually like to move a recommendation that we request the communications team to, if they can, you know, I don't know what sort of resources they have, I don't know what experience they have within their team, but if there is someone at the council who can put a video together, I think that should be done. So I'd like to move that as a recommendation, Chair.
Happy to second that? Yeah, Councillor Borough. Okay. Councillor Calder, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I do. A few things have got a lot better over the last little while. When the system came first in, there was a lot of things of not knowing how to use it, but also document names and things like that. But there's still a lot of things that aren't intuitive and need sorting out. I mean, the first place people quite often go to is the weekly list. And if you click on the weekly list, you then have a lot of applications you don't seem to be able to click on. So you then have to cut the number out, and now you have to take that number, go back a stage and paste it into the planning application numbers. So there's lots of things that I think we need IT to go and make it work better, so that if people find a planning application on the weekly list, they can click on it. Secondly, we've just had an application near us for Bellway Phase 3.
Yeah.
There's a pile of documents, and you have to go and click open document. It is very clunky, and there's not an option of download all, because you cannot, when they're on the server, search for something. So if you don't know which of those 40 documents has a bit on the school or the allotments or whatever, unless they're on your computer, you can't just go Control F, search all documents, look for allotments. You have to. So it really is very labour intensive to get them pulled down. So I think a wish list of things that need sorting and some allocation to do it would then give us a really good planning system that actually, for people who were interested in application, click on weekly list and then click on download all, and it gave you a zip file, would really work well. So I think if the planners could take those things on board, and I totally agree with Carl, a nice easy little video just to show people around the system, particularly as it's got a few idiosyncrasies at the moment, would actually show people when you've got your planning application, you need to type the number in here. And the thing that always gets people is, if you miss a zero off, things don't get found.
Okay.
And that's, there's no computer system that's modern that expects you, if the number's 3,629, to put a zero in front before it'll find it.
Anybody else on this subject? Councillor?
Just a very quick one. I've had a need to use the portal myself. Quite extensively over the last couple of weeks, and I actually found it really easy to navigate. I do agree it's a little bit clunky, and I had to download everything to my desktop and all that, but I actually found it really easy to search for stuff and to find what I was looking for.
Oh, that's good, because yours is Land Act as well, isn't it, the ones you've been looking at, whereas a lot of people are searching for a particular, it's normally the Land Acts that are more difficult for people to find.
Anybody else? With the recommendation that have been seconded, that find the panel's favour to see if we can get the communication team in to have a look at it to see how it's done easier. Okay, everybody in favour of that? Yeah, thank you. And just to finish up on that, there's Councillor Evans knows I already agreed that it should come up in front of the work, in front of this panel before it actually come up in front of the council, but I can understand the reasons why there's that little bit of disconnect, but we already agreed that we were going to do that. But item number 10 for information only. Item number 11, should we include this work programme item into the next meeting? The one has been sent by Councillor Ian Lloyd on cemetery rules and regulations. This has been going on for a few years now. I was going to use I went to say to Catherine, was it a teething problem or a snagging problem? But I thought I forgot to mention that one. But if there's still particular problems, I think we should get this up and running, and if it can be brought forward to the next meeting, we should do that. Councillor Evans?
Yeah, I agree about the suggestion form. The other thing I wanted to say on page 135 of the work programme is Civic Hall performance report for March. Obviously, Tim Norton has resigned his post as Civic Hall manager, so is that still coming to the committee? Which officer is going to be presenting that report? I just didn't want there to be a delay. It is a vital subject.
Well, I honestly do not know the answer to that question at the present moment, but I'll find out what the answer is, and I'm sure that whether Tim's there or not, somebody should be able to do the report. So we'll try and get it up and running. And Wendy, can we chase that up and see what's happening? Councillor Condipa?
Thank you. I didn't know the change of staff at Civic Hall. I think one issue I think we need to consider is keeping members informed, because I also read today about the new cinema that's planned in the Nuneaton News, and I think members should actually be given briefings at the same time as the council leader talks to the Nuneaton News, so we know what's going on if we haven't got a copy of the paper.
more information possible, trying to make informed decisions is always the best way forward.
Was that a formal recommendation?
So thanks all. There's one item I've completely forgot. It shall kill me. I never put Lynn's apologies in at the beginning of the meeting, so my fault. Could you include Lynn Price's apologies in at the beginning of the meeting, please? And thank everybody for attending and safe journey home.
Okay. Emails come out while
Yes, I just said.